Hello, dear friends. It is said that life is a balance between good and evil, but I am honored to be unbalanced in favor of good. However, it is not all roses and romance everywhere. To those who say that everything is a game, I reply that suffering is not a game at all, but the greatest problem of humankind's existence. As Buddha said, sorrow, lamentation, grief, pain, affliction, and tribulation are suffering. One suffers at birth, one suffers at death, one suffers in sickness and in old age. We suffer when we are far from what we desire, and we suffer when we are near what we do not desire. The extinction of desire would be the Buddha's ascetic solution. Do not expect political judgment from me, because I do not believe in politics, which is designed to divide us and pit us against each other. Opinion piece. Tension in Brazil. Mass protests in Brazil, rejecting the election result. Martial law could be decreed. Bolsonaro does not concede defeat, but says he will abide by the Constitution. Let's start. Tensions are high in Brazil after the election result against Bolsonaro, but in the end he has conceded without conceding defeat. The world is waiting for an explosion in Brazil, said Sorchafal. This explosion has already occurred with Bolsonaro's supporters paralyzing 18 Brazilian states with mass protests and road blockades. Now a battle is being fought between Brazil's Supreme Federal Court and its police and military forces, who so far refuse to break up these mass protests. Bolsonaro could decree martial law for fraud. In Brazil, the military has the right to intervene in an election when there is suspicion of cheating. President Bolsonaro has the authority under the Article 142 of Brazil's constitution to issue an emergency decree to his military forces to conduct an election audit. Bolsonaro meets with military ministers and still won't concede defeat, reported a Globo newspaper. Bolsonaro wants a meeting with the Supreme Court before recognizing elections. Bolsonaro concedes the presidential election at a press conference as he authorizes the start of Lula's transition of power, according to New York Times. Bolsonaro supporters create chaos on more than 200 roads after Lula's victory. Pro-Bolsonaro trackers block highways in Brazil. There have been partial or total roadblocks in all 26 states of the country. Sao Paulo will use all necessary force to break up road blockades, said governor. Bolsonaro's influence will be the new unknown in Brazilian politics. Bolsonarism does not lose at all with the newly elected governor of Sao Paulo, Tarcísio Gomes de Freitas. Lula will not support Biden's policies. Bolsonaro does not openly acknowledge his defeat against Lula, although he says he will comply with the Constitution. Bolsonaro promises to comply with all the commandments of the Constitution. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro spoke for the first time since his defeat by Lula da Silva in Sunday's election in the South American country. Faced with the impossibility of his re-election, the president stressed that he will respect the Brazilian Constitution after almost 2 days of protests by thousands of his supporters who do not recognize the result of the elections. At the same time, Brazil's Minister of the Civil House of Government, Ciro Nogueira, announced that he had been authorized by President Jair Bolsonaro to lead the transition process once the elected president Lula da Silva officially announces his vice-president to begin the transition of power. Since Sunday's election results were announced, thousands of Bolsonaro supporters have taken to the streets in different regions of Brazil to protest against the victory of Lula da Silva, who will become the president of the South American country for the third time. The impossibility of Bolsonaro's re-election provoked anger among thousands of people who, in support of the president, blocked roads, streets and even airports, causing problems in communication and transport. Since Monday night, in the state of Sao Paulo, the most populated in the country, blockades were reported on at least 10 roads, and during the early hours of Tuesday morning event, the accesses to the international airport of Guarulhos were obstructed. Faced with this violent incident, President Bolsonaro said Tuesday during his public message that the protests by his followers are the result of indignation and a feeling of injustice, in quotes, and the way the electoral process was conducted. In quotes again, peaceful demonstrations will always be welcome, but our methods cannot be theirs, which harmed the population. He added in reference to the blockades that are leaving thousands of Brazilians stuck and starting to create problems of shortages. Reset News. Real Raw News says Biden's bosses have fled because they know they are going to be arrested. According to Big Swear, the good guys are still in charge and are destroying the central banking system to bring us to a new system. The bad guys are fighting to hold on, but the people are waking up. When the crash comes, the anger is going to be off the charts. According to Stephen Van Metre, the world's elite are panicking as major economies are failing. The biggest collapse in 40 years is causing the world's elite to panic as major economies are failing. Eurozone inflation is running rampant and, with history as a guide, will soon fall into recession or worse, depression. Asia is also struggling as the collapse in global demand is beginning to hurt China's export-driven economy. According to X22 report, inflation is hitting the European Union, and every move the central bank makes is pushing people against them. Eurozone inflation reaches a new record high of 10.7% in October. Lagarde confirms that rate hikes will continue in order to obtain inflation at 2%. The US asked the European Union to limit China's exports. Elon Musk fires all 9 members of Twitter's board of directors. In 1953, a scientist predicted that a man named Elon would take humans to Mars and crown himself Emperor of Mars. Another case of predictive programming. In 1953, a book was published predicting the plans of one Elon to take humans to Mars. On 30th December, Elon Musk quoted a popular phrase from Young Frankenstein on Twitter, in quotes, "Destiny, destiny. There is no escape for me." The price of the Solana cryptocurrency is up more than 3% in 24 hours. Various countries. Russia proposes to create an alternative to SWIFT for major Asian economies. It is an impossible dream to break China's grip on the rare earth market, says Australia. China's markets rally after a confirmed report of reopening. How Russia and China are viewed in the international community. More than half of the population in developing countries view Russia and China positively, reveals a survey provided by Cambridge University. Saudi Arabia increases crude oil extraction and reduces harmful leaks. OPEC says oil will be the main fuel until at least 2045. Ukraine. Hacker claims to have discovered all the plans of the Ukrainian military command. A Ukrainian hacker who moved to the Republic of Donetsk and operates under the pseudonym Thugger claimed to have discovered all the plans of the Ukrainian military authorities. Earlier, he reported on his Telegram channel to have hacked into the Delta program used by Kiev for command and control of troops and data storage. In quotes, absolutely everything, all the data that the Ukrainian command has on its troops and Russian troops. A large amount of data has already been transferred to where it belongs, the hacker said. Pentagon confirms US troops on the ground in Ukraine. Two explosive reports by the Associated Press and Washington Post on Monday and Tuesday confirmed that the US has boots on the ground in the Ukraine conflict. Crucially, these troops are performing tasks separate from mere embassy security. The troops are said to be conducting inspections on US weapons caches. Biden reportedly lost his temper with Zelensky over Ukraine aid. According to sources quoted by NBC News, Biden and Zelensky had a telephone conversation in which Zelensky notified Kiev that the new multi-million-dollar support package for Ukraine had just been approved. However, Zelensky, instead of being grateful, reminded Biden that his country needs more aid and listed the list of missing requests. This infuriated Biden, who raised his voice against Zelensky, reminding him that Washington was already being very generous to Ukraine. Russia. Moscow awaits London's explanation for Truss's leaked message on Nord Stream. Former British Prime Minister Liz Truss reportedly sent a message with the phrase "It's done" to Secretary of State Antony Blinken immediately after the attack on the Nord Stream branches. The Russian Foreign Ministry is awaiting an explanation from London. Moscow promises to maintain dialogue with the United Nations and Turkey on the Food Pact. Why did Russia leave the Food Pact? Russia's decision to leave the pact was announced after the attack by non-nuclear underwater vehicles. The decision by Russia to leave the pact follows the attack by unnamed underwater vehicles used by Kiev to attack the Russian military fleet, as well as civilian ships near the city of Sevastopol in southwest Crimea. Moscow urges Kiev to ensure that it doesn't use the Black Sea corridor for military purposes. Russia says it will not allow ships to cross the Black Sea without its inspection. More than 50,000 people volunteered to fight on the Russian side in Ukraine. Russia recruits US-trained Afghan commandos. Afghan Special Forces soldiers who fought alongside US troops and then fled to Iran after the chaotic US withdrawal last year are now being recruited by the Russian army to fight in Ukraine. 3 former Afghan generals tell the Associated Press. Russian court fines Wikipedia for alleged falsehoods about Ukraine operation. A Russian court has ordered the non-profit Wikimedia Foundation, which owns the online encyclopedia Wikipedia, to pay a fine of about 32,455 for failing to delete 2 pieces that it said contained false information about the Russian military operation. Trade and economic cooperation between Russia and Iran despite sanctions. A military coup is currently being carried out by the dark side in Iran to prevent Iran from joining the BRICS system. There is a huge turmoil in Iran which wants to change its system to an open society an equal rights regime. Failure of Russia sanctions leads to Western frustration, says the New York Times. Russia begins inspection of explosion-damaged Nord Stream. The explosion ripped out a 40-meter section of pipe and separated the lines by 250 meters. There was a piece bent 90 degrees and thrown against another part of Nord Stream. And that's all for today. Thanks a lot, dear friends.